I've ever experienced. Infighting, it was just awful. So what I took from that was that do not always believe what people promise you.
Right.
It's a very tricky decision to make, but with that experience that I have, I would go into another situation a lot different.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Wednesday is your favorite time of the week because it's time. As always, I am your intrepid host, Andrew Dupy, Chief Relationship Officer here. And today, in the words of the great David Letterman, now for something completely different. My next guest is Omar Yapor. And let me introduce you to Omar, take a little bit of time here with him. So he was born in Manhattan, and Omar attended Parsons School of Design for 2 years before he transferred to the Fashion Institute of Technology, where he graduated with an associate degree in fashion design and a Bachelor of Arts in fashion design and merchandising. Omar has worked for several very high-profile companies. You might have heard of a little place called Calvin Klein, or maybe Carolyn Herrera, Bill Blass, Ralph Lauren, little companies here and there. And he also founded his own label, Omar Yapor LLC. His career has seen great success. It's also seen some great setbacks. And we're going to hear straight from the man how he handled both, got through both, and where he is at now and where he is going. Omar, welcome. You are our first fashion designer on Leaders Talk.
Welcome, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing great, sir. So
I'm good
tell,
too. Glad to
yeah,
be here.
and we're very happy to have you. And take a second here. We walked our audience a little bit through your story, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. So tell our audience a bit about yourself.
Well, like I said, I was born in Manhattan, born and raised in Manhattan. I've lived in several places, even as a teenager when my parents moved, and then as an adult, worked in Germany and in Europe.
Mm.
And then I came back to the United States where I did work for those companies like Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein and so forth, and then started my own label. And then the recession of 2008 kind of set back and made me have to reaffirm everything that I've done so far because everything crashed and burned, so to speak. So now it's taken years to sort of get my legs back, and now I'm on to new ventures and new businesses and new brands. So so I'm just hoping for the best.
And I think that resonates with a lot of our audience. I mean, in the year and a half, 2 years now that we've actually been doing this show, we've had many people that had that same story that, that they had their initial entry into the world of whatever business they're in. And with those two big things that came up in everybody's life in the roadblocks is that it's either financial crisis 2008 or
Yeah.
2020 that just made everybody have to stop and reevaluate. So at this point, that's almost the entire business story of anyone that's
Yeah.
been around since before those. So tell us a little bit just about how you got known and got visible at first before you actually launched your own label.
You mean how I got visible within the industry?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Because it's a big industry. I mean,
yeah.
how does one stand out in all of that noise?
Well, like I said, I was working at Ralph Lauren, so that was a standout within
Yeah.
itself. And working there actually opened up some doors and actually got me to get some contacts within the industry. When you work for a prestigious company like Ralph Lauren, it sort of not opens doors, but it allows you to obtain contacts that you wouldn't normally obtain if you were working for
Right.
less prestigious. So then that's how I got to have more visibility within the industry and outside the industry as well, as far as finance or VC or magazine people and so forth. So, that was, but the step between Ralph Lauren and me starting a label, there was another step, which I
Okay.
worked for Bill Blass. Um, and that was a situation where they were courting me and they presented a very nice picture. They presented a lot of money, and they basically, I'll never forget, the CEO told me, he's like, in Ralph Lauren, you're one of 400, and here you'll be one of two. Asking me to go over to Bill Blass, with this company that just bought the licensing rights. So then I made this switch, and I was very happy at Ralph Lauren, but made the switch, and then that turned out to be the worst work environment that I've ever experienced. Infighting, it was just awful. So what I took from that was that do not always believe what people promise you.
Right.
It's a very tricky decision to make, but with that experience that I have, I would go into another situation a lot differently.
Yeah, and we hear that a lot. I mean, many of our guests in the past have talked about the fact that the that office environment, the big business, the big corporate is actually the experience there is what drove them to become inspired to start their own business. Is
Mhm.
that kind of the same journey that you took?
Yeah, I completely agree. Just the fact that that it's somebody you have to have inherently in you to want to be in control of your own destiny, and that was what was it for me, what it was for
Right.
me. Um, of course, I needed experience within the industry, but even when I was in school, in fashion school, I had the ideas of having my own brand or label, and then getting the fashion, getting the experience in Europe and Ralph Lauren and stuff like that. And then ultimately in Bill Blass, which was not a great situation or a horrible situation, that just pushed it along faster. So after that, then I decided to do my own label. So it's funny because if I would have been at Ralph Lauren, maybe it would have took longer for me to start my own label, because I was very happy there. And then the fact that the work environment was toxic at Bill Blast, that really
Right.
pushed me to start my own thing.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the spark of the entrepreneurial spirit, though. It's like when you see something that you realize is a bad situation, and you're somebody that does have that entrepreneurial spirit, you begin to think about, man, I could maybe do this a little bit better.
Yeah, I just recommend that you think it because I thought it out and try to plan it meticulously how I would do that, and also where I would get the funds, including my own funds. So number one, you have to expect to go all in. You can't just
Yeah.
do it. You can't just do it a couple hours a night. I mean, it depends, but something like the fashion industry that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, especially when you can't afford to hire excessive amount of staff. So just meticulously plan, and that plan will not always work out. And almost 90% of the time, it doesn't work as planned. But at least you have an outline.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of people think about when they're beginning to get into that area where they're pivoting and I'm going to go from my office job, I'm going to take that next step, I'm going to take that challenge, I'm going to
Mhm,
become that consultant, I'm going to become that CEO that
mhm.
I've always wanted to be. The biggest fear that I've always heard from them is, that idea of imposter syndrome, that idea that how am I going to be different from every other person in my industry? Was that something that was holding you back in any way?
I mean, it was something of a concern. How am I going to? But because apparel is such a creative field, and
Right.
you just it's I took it as the same way as I'm designing a line for somebody else, which I've done a lot of times. You present the concept for the coming season, and you're hoping that your concept will be creative enough that people will take notice. Also, I had bullet points for the line. I wanted to be justifiable, justifiable cost, meaning that somebody looks at a piece of garment, they're like, okay, it's not cheap, but it's justifiable
Mhm.
considering the materials and the construction and so forth. So I did have an angle to work with because I saw a lot of stuff in the market that was um, very expensive. Not really Louis Vuitton or stuff like that, but very expensive. Construction was that, but I thought it was just too expensive for what people were getting.
Right.
So that just with that said, it's just like creating a strategy. Like anything, you're selling a widget, you create a strategy. How is that to sell apart from the rest? Now, a big thing now is sustainability. So it
Yeah.
all changes and pivots. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you built your company, it got started, and then you hit that financial crisis. So talk us through a little bit about the challenges of that, and yeah, without too much pain. I mean, this isn't the dentist's office,
Yeah,
so
I do not mind. I mean, it's painful, but I do not mind discussing it. At this point,
right, and
I do
we
not
can
mind
always learn from
discussing it.
this.
Yeah. So basically, I started the company in 2006. It was actually doing really well. We had, I don't know, 140 doors that we were selling product through. And then in 2008, I actually was approached by investors. I actually had a VC guy that I met through a friend of a friend, and
Mhm.
I was actually approached with investors. So I had the numbers to get funding. So basically, basically, we had signed the contracts in July, so for the end of July, for the cash infusion. So me wanting to make an impact, I and knowing that I signed the investment contracts to for this cash infusion, I decided to make an impact in the industry and do a fashion show
Yeah.
for yeah, do a fashion show. So I basically borrowed money from everybody that I could, thinking that I was going to get the cash infusion from the investors. Unfortunately, so I basically, did everything. I created the line. I planned a fashion show. The fashion show premiered in September of, I think it was September 13th or something like that. So basically, I signed the contracts on the end of July, and the check would be coming in September, end of August or September. The
Okay.
actual investment.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did the fashion, and then the investors were invited to the fashion show and everything, which they came. But then I think it was a couple of days later, the bottom fell out of the financial market.
Right. Yeah. It was right then
Shearson,
that that happened.
remember when Shearson Lehman said they're going bankrupt? This was Shearson Lehman. It was like September 20th or something
Yeah,
like
it was
that.
September. That was right when I moved to Atlanta, and we were in the same situation. I got
Exactly,
a pink slip when I
exactly.
arrived at my new job.
So yeah, so basically when that happened, I just spent about a $250,000 on this fashion show with the line, the fashion show and everything, maybe a little less, maybe a little, I don't know. But then the investors turned around and told me, they're like, we're not going to give you the cash infusion until we know what's going on.
Mhm.
And they're like, we know we signed a contract, but we'll tie this up in court for the next 10 years. And I did not have this is playing with the big boys. I did not have the resources to even begin to fight a group of
Yeah.
investors from Palm Beach. So it's you
Yeah.
live and you learn. And it was so that's basically what happened. It was literally the financial crisis was a bomb that dropped, and I was at ground zero.
Right. Yeah. And that's and the thing is, I think a lot of people at this point have that experience
Yeah,
in business because we've now had that. Like I said earlier in the interview, we've had it happen two times now. Really, and yeah, it's painful. But how did you persevere? It's really that power of perseverance. A lot of people would just say, "Okay, I quit. I go back to my office job. I find something else. I do." It just my dream is done and I'm gone. So what did you in yourself were you able to find to keep you going?
well, it was I mean it was a rough time. It was a rough time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there was because of the recession, and the apparel industry was hit the hardest, one of the hardest hit industries. um
Clearly, yeah.
I
Luxury
basically
stuff.
survival. I basically just had to do what I had to do to survive.
Right.
um and then I got over the pity stage, and then I basically just started going back to corporate, working on it as a consultant
Mm.
or a full-time job. The thing was that there wasn't any of these jobs, or very little of these jobs, as
Right.
opposed to a year before. So I basically, survival, I taught myself different skill set, and to increase my skill set so I can actually earn money within the industry. Even at a certain point, I went back to bartending certain days a week. So
Hey,
yeah,
whatever works.
it's whatever works, whatever you, and this is where it's just a basic need of survival, and just do it whatever it takes. And then with that, I started working more in the in the corporate world, well, apparel companies, and then eventually I got an idea for another venture and so forth, and this is where I am now.
Awesome. And yeah, that's really I think the heart of it is that when you face that kind of adversity, yeah, you do what needs to be done until you finally get to the point where that next idea can come up and that you can follow it through. So, tell us a little bit about your ventures right now. Where are you hoping to go?
Well, I started with my partner, of course. I have a women's accessory line called Robin Lisa Apparel LLC,
Okay.
and then with that we have the children's wear line called Cool as Cats. And Cool as Cats is a children's apparel line, all organic, sustainable, ethical, and it's based on our cat characters that we designed. And we have great hopes for it. We're launching we did a soft launch for whole retailers, and we're doing a hard launch in fall 2024.
Awesome. And what kind of things are inspiring you right now? I know a lot of our people like books. Books is kind of a thing. Are there any books that you read during this period? Anything that you had that that kept you going, that kept you inspired, that kept the ideas fresh, and just kept you on your feet?
Actually, I had the books that inspired me was the I haven't written. I wrote it down because I just books on business and books
Yeah.
on yes, I mean books of struggle, books of of perseverance. Um I reread during that time I reread The Count of Monte Cristo.
There you go.
Yeah. It is inspiring, and it's yeah, it's just there's a lot other people that have dealt with more than I did, more adverse situations than I have.
Right.
So it's a matter of just, doing the pros and cons, basically stipulating your assets or acknowledging what assets you have
Mm,
to help you get to the next level, not just focus on the negative.
yeah.
That's a big thing, because if you focus on the positives, then that will actually mentally will pump you up to keep pushing forward.
That is such a good point, because that's actually something, in every business. I mean, even our business has had the moments where things have been difficult. And it's
Yeah.
very easy to that point to go into that negative headspace and begin to only see, oh my gosh, I have to do some layoffs. I can't
Yeah.
avoid it. Oh my gosh, I have to do some cuts to our overhead. Oh my gosh, I may have to delay payroll, or even stop taking one myself as a leader.
Mhm.
And you can get really tied in all the negatives of that.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of push that out of your head, don't you? Just try and stay in charge of the situation.
Yes, you have to stay in charge of the situation and always look at the what the end result is.
Right.
If you let's say you have to make cuts, and if you don't make cuts, what's the end result? Okay, you might stay afloat for another 6 months, but then you're ultimately gonna it's gonna be the demise of the company. So
Right.
would you rather make the cuts now and be able to retool, regroup, and push forward, or not make cuts and then not make cuts hoping things will turn around, which is a very gray area if they do, if they don't. Um, and then you might go under in 6 months. Always think positively, but prepare for the worst. Yeah,
Exactly. Because
that's my
false could
motto.
be just as bad.
Yeah, exactly. If you're too positive and you think everything's just going to work out, that's not, and you're not prepared for it, that's where. So I always think positive. I'm optimistic enough where I think positive, but prepare for the worst. And that's even emotionally or mentally, with a company, with things that don't work out. I always prepare myself that it won't work out and have plan A, B, and C, you can never go wrong. If you have three plans for the worst case scenario, everything else is butter.
Mm. Yeah. Now, your scenario was fairly unusual. I mean, there's something that almost unavoidable. It's like kind of you found yourself
Yeah.
standing on a train track in the dead of night and didn't realize you were there.
Yeah.
But what kind of things do you suggest to people to try and avoid, maybe some of the pitfalls that happened or to you, or that you might have been able to, if you had a little bit more foresight, known that more problems are going to come along? Any advice for our audience about ways to avoid that kind of thing?
Yes. I mean, it's like my dad used to give me this advice, and it sounds simplistic, but if you follow this advice, it has worked in every aspect of my life, from business to personal to everything. And it's basically simple: don't count your chickens before they hatch.
There you go.
And like I said, it sounds simplistic, but it is the best advice that he ever gave me, because it's true. Don't count on things that aren't materialized yet.
Yeah.
Work towards materializing those things, but don't count on them until you actually have them. And I read stories, and I see stories about people, TV shows and so on, that they always count on something that hasn't materialized, and then it doesn't work out, and
Yeah.
then they're left in a very bad situation. So that works for everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really good advice, because I've heard more than once about, starting out a business. You have that rosy idea of, I'm going to do this and things are just going to happen the way that I imagine them to happen. And so why not just go ahead and the movie The Producers? I'm gonna go ahead and flaunt it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll go ahead and put that down payment on the Maserati.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I've got gold going
Yeah.
right here.
And you know what? I'm kind of guilty of that to an extent as
Mm.
well, because I thought I was heading into great things. The line
Yeah,
was selling. I thought, and then boom, somebody dropped the bomb out of nowhere. Nobody expected that bomb
yeah.
of the recession of 2008. It was a huge bomb, and it totally did. So this is the thing. Always, yeah, it's crazy how it works. And that was, in a sense, that was for my own validation or worth. At least it wasn't a mistake that I made.
Right.
That kept me going too. It was something outside that didn't even have to do with the apparel industry that put me in that situation. At least it wasn't my fault that I put me in that situation. It was outside, yeah, outside, beyond my control, outside things. Yeah, and that kept me pushing forward too.
I think that's important though, because that's the thing that sometimes people miss when they start planning out their next move in business is they
Mhm.
miss the idea that if they're very competent, they're very connected, just as you were. I mean, you had all the expertise, you had everything handled, you had everything down. But there's always the chance that Murphy's Law is going to happen. Excuse the
Exactly.
French, ladies and gentlemen, shit happens. And then, you're in a situation where, despite the fact that you're an expert, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just something that I think that a lot of people don't exactly plan for. And they learned that lesson really the
Yeah.
hard way in
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah,
It-
I completely agree. I'm always in reassessment mode. I
Mhm.
always think of the past and reassess the past to make decisions in the future, or assess my experience to make decisions in the future. Together with don't count your chickens before they hatch. Together with the other points, it really drives you forward. And then a lot of people in business or starting, they have confidence issues, uh,
Right.
whether they can do it or not. And I overcame those confidence issues because I would put myself in situations to challenge myself.
Mhm.
Um, and then you think back on those, and you're like, well, if I did that, I have the ability to do this. Put yourself, take on challenging situations, whether if it's even a job or a freelance role or a project or anything. Could be a home DIY project. Challenge yourself to use your brain, and you'd be surprised that will give you confidence and be like, okay, I did that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we're in the industry that we're in, because, we feel that when people take that step with books, with all that, that's usually what's holding them back is the
Mhm.
lack of confidence,
Yeah,
lack of the that imposter syndrome that comes in, just lack of that idea that they can even really do it. And then,
yeah, yeah,
and what we found for years now is once people make those kind of steps, they find, wow, I can. And then it
yeah,
unlocks all the doors they've been
yeah,
closing to themselves.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Also, yeah, that is true. But also, people have to know the bare facts of starting something. Like
Right.
a bartender's not going to start a mechanic shop and not know anything about mechanics, which I
Yep.
find I come across in my industry all the time. Like if I had $1 for every person I said, "Oh, I'm thinking of starting a t-shirt line. What steps should I take?" I'm like, well, you have no experience whatsoever in the apparel industry, so maybe you should go into a business venture that you know something about. You
Yeah.
know, unless you have the ways to the means or the financial means to hire an entire staff. Yeah, but go into something that you're familiar with, because
Right.
it's not a good move to go into an industry that you know nothing about.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
me going into a food venture. I know nothing about that. Yeah,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it works depending on the situation you're in, but
yeah.
you need to be a subject matter field and you're expert if you're really going to do a venture.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, Omar, usually I kind of ask for a golden nugget, but we've got a lot of really useful stuff that you've said in this one. And so as we're kind of running short on time, how can our audience find out more about you?
They can go on my LinkedIn page.
Sure.
They can visit the website for Rob and Lisa, which is robinlisanyc.com. They can
Excellent.
Coolest Cats New York, www.coolestcats.nyc. NY is our website for that. But the Instagram page, follow us on Instagram. We are at Cool as Cats New York on Instagram, and please follow us. There's some product there. I have to post a lot more product, but we are just starting out. But yeah, and there's more to come.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, those links are listed down below. Omar, this has been fun. Again, you're our first guest from the fashion industry, so I had to stop myself from like really starting to dig in and asking some questions that probably wouldn't have been useful for this. But hey, maybe again next time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we loved having you, and we really wish you the best.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me. And I wish,
Thank you.
and I wish you all the best with the podcast.
Excellent.